The billionaire lost every nanny in a week until one calmed his toddlers in 3 days and his heart. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The afternoon light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackthorne mansion, casting long shadows across the marble foyer. Darien Blackthorne stood at the edge of his home office doorway, his tall frame rigid with barely contained frustration as he watched the latest nanny. Margaret something hurried down the grand staircase with her suitcase in hand. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said, not quite meeting his piercing gray eyes, "I'm truly sorry, but this arrangement isn't working out." Darien's jaw tightened. At 40, he commanded boardrooms filled with the world's most powerful tech executives, yet he couldn't keep a single nanny in his home for more than a week. His dark hair, always perfectly styled for business meetings, showed the signs of him running his hands through it in exasperation. The tailored charcoal suit that made him look invincible in the corporate world felt like armor that was failing him here in his own home. "That's the 5th one this month," he said, his voice low and controlled, though something dangerous flickered in his gray eyes. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "Your children are challenging. They need more attention than I can provide." Through the intercom system, the sound of something crashing upstairs echoed through the house, followed by 3-year-old Dante's defiant shout, "We don't want you here anyway." Darien closed his eyes briefly, feeling the familiar weight of inadequacy settled on his shoulders. When he opened them, Margaret was already at the front door. "Good luck, Mr. Blackthorne," she said. And then she was gone, leaving only the echo of her heels on marble and the lingering scent of expensive cleaning products that never quite masked the underlying emptiness of the house. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The children's playroom was a disaster zone, toys scattered everywhere, picture books torn, and in the center of it all sat Dante and Lizzie, his 3-year-old twins, looking like beautiful little tornadoes, with their dark hair and eyes that mirrored his own storm-gray gaze. Dante, with his stubborn chin and defiant posture, sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, building something with blocks while deliberately knocking them down. Lizzie, smaller and quieter but no less determined, had cornered her stuffed rabbit in the window seat, whispering to it in the serious tone that always made Darien's chest ache with memories he tried to suppress. They looked so much like Emma. The same delicate features, the same way Lizzie tilted her head when she was thinking, the same fire in Dante's eyes when he was determined to get his way. "Another one left," Darien said, leaning against the doorframe. Dante didn't look up. Good, she smelled like old flowers. She was trying to help. "We don't need help," Lizzie said quietly, still focused on her rabbit. "We have each other." The simple statement hit him harder than any corporate takeover ever had. These children, his children, had learned to rely only on each other because he had failed them. 3 years since Emma died during their birth. 3 years of grief that had turned him into a ghost in his own home. 3 years of hiring strangers to fill a role he couldn't figure out how to play himself. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Mrs. Henley's number, the placement agency that had been patiently finding him nanny after nanny. His thumb hovered over the call button. "Daddy." Liz's small voice made him look up. She was standing now, holding her rabbit tight against her chest. "Are you going to find another lady who doesn't like us?" The question was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone that only children possessed, but it cut through him like broken glass. He knelt down to her level, seeing Emma's eyes staring back at him, trusting, hopeful, and already learning to protect themselves from disappointment. "I'm trying to find someone who will stay," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "They all leave," Dante said, finally looking at him, "just like Mommy did." Darien's breath caught in his throat. In 3 years, neither of them had ever said anything like that. They barely remembered Emma. But somehow they understood abandonment in a way that made him want to tear down the walls he'd built around his heart. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Morrison, his elderly housekeeper, who had been with the family for 20 years. "I may have someone different from the others. Her name is Autumn Reyes. Available tomorrow if you're willing to try something new." He stared at the message, then at his children, who were watching him with the careful attention of 2 small people, who had learned that adult decisions shaped their entire world. What choice did he have but to hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Seattle feel alive with possibility. Autumn Reyes sat in her aging Honda Civic outside the Blackthornne estate, taking slow, steady breaths as she studied the imposing iron gates and the mansion beyond them. At 29, she had learned that first impressions of wealth often masked the deepest wounds, and something about Mrs. Morrison's careful words on the phone told her this family needed more than just childcare. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore dark jeans with a soft cream sweater. Practical clothes that wouldn't intimidate children, but still looked professional. She carried no elaborate bags of activities or rigid schedules like the previous nannies had. Instead, she brought only herself, patient green eyes that had seen too much pain in her work as a social worker, hands that knew how to comfort without overwhelming, and a heart that had been healing itself for the past 6 months. The gates opened electronically, and she drove up the winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. The house was beautiful in the way that money could make anything beautiful. All clean lines and expensive materials, but there was something hollow about its perfection. Like a magazine photo that no one actually lived in. Mrs. Morrison, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, met her at the front door. "Miss Reyes, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please call me Autumn." She stepped into the foyer, noting how her footsteps echoed in the vast space. "Mrs. Morrison, can you tell me what happened with the previous nannies?" The real story. The older woman glanced toward the staircase, then lowered her voice. "The children, they test boundaries. Dante acts out, throws things, hides toys, refuses to cooperate. Lizzie goes silent for hours, sometimes days. The nannies see it as defiance, but you see it differently. I see 2 babies who lost their mother before they could even know her, being raised by a father who's drowning in his own grief." Mrs. Morrison's eyes were gentle but honest. "Mr. Blackthorne isn't a bad man, Miss Autumn. He's just forgotten how to be anything but the businessman who built an empire. He thinks love is providing for them, protecting them. He doesn't understand that children need presence, not just provision." Before Autumn could respond, a crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of something rolling across hardwood floors. Mrs. Morrison sighed. That would be the morning routine. "Mr. Blackthorne left for work an hour ago. He has back-to-back meetings until 7 tonight. The children are well, you'll see." They climbed the curved staircase together, and Autumn took in the family portraits lining the wall. There was Darien, in various business settings, looking powerful and untouchable. Then suddenly a different photo stopped her. Darien with a beautiful blonde woman, both of them laughing, her hand resting on a rounded belly. The woman's eyes sparkled with life and joy. And Darien looked younger somehow, softer around the edges. "Emma," Mrs. Morrison said quietly, "beautiful, inside and out. Her death changed everything." The sound of arguing grew louder as they approached the children's wing. Through an open doorway, Autumn could see a breakfast tray overturned on the floor, orange juice seeping into what looked like a very expensive rug. Dante stood defiantly beside the mess, his small arms crossed, while Lizzie sat in the corner with her stuffed rabbit, watching everything with wide, serious eyes. "I don't want breakfast. I want Daddy," Dante shouted at no one in particular. Autumn stepped into the room slowly, not rushing to clean the mess or immediately address the behavior. Instead, she sat down on the floor near the overturned tray, cross-legged, and looked at the chaos with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "Wow," she said conversationally. "Orange juice makes interesting patterns when it spills like that, almost like a sunset." Dante stopped mid-tantrum and stared at her. This was clearly not the reaction he was used to. Lizzie peeked over her rabbit's ears, curious despite herself. "You're not going to yell at us?" Dante asked suspiciously. "Why would I yell? Seems like you're already upset enough for everyone." Autumn picked up a piece of toast from the floor, examining it thoughtfully. "Besides, I'm more interested in figuring out what's really bothering you than cleaning up orange juice." She looked directly at him, and something in her calm green eyes made his defiant posture waver slightly. "Want to tell me what's really wrong, Dante?" For a moment, the room was silent, except for the distant sound of traffic beyond the estate's walls. Then, in a voice much smaller than his earlier shouts, Dante whispered, "He left before we got up again." Autumn's heart clenched, but her expression remained gentle and understanding. She had worked with enough children from broken homes to recognize the desperate bid for attention that looked like rebellion on the surface. "That must feel pretty lonely," she said simply. Lizzie stood up from her corner, still clutching her rabbit. and took a tentative step closer. "Are you going to leave, too?" The question hung in the air like a challenge and a plea all at once, and Autumn realized that these weren't just children acting out. They were children who had learned that every adult who entered their lives eventually disappeared, and they were protecting themselves the only way they knew how. But as she looked into their storm-gay eyes, so much like their father's, she also saw something else. Hope buried deep, but still flickering, waiting for someone to prove them wrong. The sound of Darien's car pulling back into the driveway at noon, hours earlier than expected, drifted through the windows, and Autumn heard his rapid footsteps on the marble stairs moments later. Darien took the stairs 2 at a time, his Italian leather shoes striking the marble with sharp precision. He had left the board meeting early, after receiving a text from Mrs. Morrison about another incident with breakfast, and his patience had finally reached its breaking point. Enough was enough. If this new nanny couldn't handle a simple morning routine, he would handle the children himself until he found a solution that actually worked. But as he reached the top of the staircase, something stopped him. Cold silence, not the oppressive silence of children hiding after causing trouble, but something else entirely. A peaceful quiet that he hadn't heard in his home for 3 years. He slowed his approach to the playroom, his hand hovering over the doorknob as he heard a soft voice from within, and the little fox realized that being different wasn't something to hide from, but something that made him special. The voice was warm and melodic, with just the faintest trace of a southern accent that suggested roots far from Seattle's rain-soaked sophistication. Through the crack in the door, he could see the new nanny, Autumn, he remembered, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The breakfast mess had been cleaned up, but she wasn't lecturing the children about making messes. Instead, she was reading from a picture book, and both Dante and Lizzie were curled up on either side of her, completely captivated. Darien's breath caught in his throat. When was the last time he had seen his children look so peaceful? "Read it again," Lizzie whispered, her small hand resting on Autumn's arm. It was the first time in months that Darien had heard his daughter speak, above a whisper, to anyone except Dante. Again, Autumn smiled, and Darien could hear the genuine warmth in it. "Well, I suppose the little fox's adventure is worth hearing twice." As she began the story again, Darien found himself leaning against the doorframe, studying this woman who had somehow accomplished in 3 hours what 5 previous nannies couldn't manage in a week. She was nothing like he had expected. The agency usually sent polished, professional women with impressive credentials and rigid schedules. This woman looked like she belonged in a coffee shop or an art studio, not in his pristine mansion. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and when she smiled at something Dante said, her whole face transformed. There was something unguarded about her expression, something real in a way that made the carefully controlled environment of his home feel suddenly artificial. Daddy Dante had spotted him through the crack in the door, and scrambled to his feet, his earlier defiance replaced by surprised delight. "You came back." Autumn looked up as Darien stepped into the room, and for a moment their eyes met directly. Hers were green, not the sharp, ambitious green of emeralds, but the soft, deeper green of forest moss. There was intelligence there, and something else that made him feel strangely exposed, as if she could see through the expensive suit and controlled exterior, to the man who was barely keeping himself together. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said, rising gracefully to her feet. She was smaller than he had initially thought, probably 5'5" to his 6'3", but there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. "I wasn't expecting you back so early. I heard there was an incident with breakfast." His voice came out more formal than he intended, the boardroom tone he used when he needed to maintain distance and control. "There was some spilled orange juice," she said calmly, "but we worked it out." Dante tugged on his father's suit jacket. "Daddy Autumn says that when we're upset, it's okay to feel upset, but it's not okay to hurt things or people. And she knows a story about a fox who was sad, but found friends anyway." Darien looked down at his son, really looked at him, and realized that Dante's eyes were brighter than they had been in weeks. There was no defiance there now, no careful distance, just the open enthusiasm of a 3-year-old who had found someone willing to listen to him. "She read it twice," Lizzie added quietly, still holding her stuffed rabbit, but no longer hiding behind it. "And she said, 'My rabbit has a very wise expression.'" Something shifted in Darien's chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. These were his children actually engaging with an adult, actually happy, and he had almost forgotten what that looked like. "Mrs. Morrison mentioned, you're not traditionally trained as a nanny," he said to Autumn, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor while processing the scene in front of him. "No, I'm not. She met his gaze directly, unintimidated by his towering presence or the obvious wealth that surrounded them. I was a social worker for 6 years before taking some time off. I'm used to working with children who are processing difficult emotions. The way she said it, without judgment, without pity, just matter-of-fact understanding, made something in his carefully controlled facade crack slightly. She wasn't treating his children like problems to be managed or challenging behavior to be corrected. She was treating them like small human beings with legitimate feelings. "And you think my children have difficult emotions to process?" The question came out sharper than he intended, his instinctive defensiveness rising. Autumn tilted her head slightly, considering him with those calm green eyes. "I think all children who have experienced loss have difficult emotions to process. I also think they're incredibly resilient when they feel safe and heard." The simple honesty of her response disarmed him completely. She wasn't making accusations or offering unsolicited advice about his parenting. She was simply acknowledging a truth that he had been too afraid to face himself. His children were grieving too, in ways he had never allowed himself to see. "Daddy, can Autumn stay for lunch?" Dante asked, breaking the weighted silence that had fallen between the adults. "She makes sandwiches that look like animals." "Please," Lizzie added, her voice still soft, but holding a note of hope that made Darien's throat tight. He looked at Autumn, this stranger who had somehow brought light back into his children's eyes in the span of a single morning, and felt the ground beneath his feet shift in a way that had nothing to do with business mergers or market fluctuations, and everything to do with the growing realization that maybe, just maybe, what his family needed couldn't be bought or scheduled or controlled. It could only be lived, one quiet moment of connection at a time. 3 days later, Darien found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, leaving work early on purpose, not because of an emergency or a crisis with the children, but because he was genuinely curious about what he would find when he got home. For the past 3 days, he had returned to a house that felt fundamentally different, not just quiet, but alive in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. As he pulled into the circular driveway, he could hear something that made him stop in his tracks. Laughter, real, uninhibited children's laughter, floating through the crisp autumn air from the backyard. He followed the sound around the side of the house, loosening his silver tie as he walked. What he found there challenged every assumption he had made about structure, discipline, and proper childcare. Autumn was sitting in the middle of his perfectly manicured lawn, her jeans grass-stained, her auburn hair escaping its ponytail in soft wisps around her face. She had apparently been helping Dante and Lizzie build what could only be described as the world's most elaborate leaf fort, using the fallen maple leaves that the landscaping crew usually cleared away immediately. Dante was completely covered in orange and red leaves, giggling as he tried to bury himself deeper into the pile, while Lizzie was carefully arranging smaller leaves in intricate patterns around the fort's perimeter. Both children were filthy, their clothes stained with dirt and grass, their faces flushed with genuine joy. "Autumn, watch this," Dante called out, then proceeded to execute what could generously be called a cartwheel, but looked more like an enthusiastic tumble into the leaf pile. Instead of lecturing him about safety or proper behavior, Autumn clapped enthusiastically. "That was magnificent. I think the leaves definitely approved of that landing." "My turn," Lizzie said, her voice stronger and more confident than Darien had heard it in months. She attempted her own cartwheel, smaller and more careful than her brother's, but when she landed safely in the leaves, her smile was radiant. Darien stood there, transfixed. These weren't the same children who had been distant and defiant just days ago. These were normal, happy 3-year-olds, and he was seeing them for what felt like the first time. "Daddy." Lizzie spotted him first and came running, leaves trailing behind her like confetti. She launched herself into his arms without hesitation, something she hadn't done in months, getting dirt on his pristine charcoal suit. For once, he didn't care. "You're home early again," she said, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Are you going to play in the leaves with us?" The question was so simple, so natural, but it hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time either of his children had invited him to play? When was the last time he had said yes? He looked over Liz's head at Autumn, who was now standing, brushing leaves from her sweater. She wasn't watching him with the careful deference that previous nannies had shown, waiting for his approval or disapproval. Instead, she looked genuinely curious about what he would choose to do. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said, her voice warm but respectful. "We were just finishing up. If you'd prefer the children to come inside and get cleaned up." "No," he said quickly, surprising himself. "I mean, if they're having fun." Dante appeared at his side, tugging on his other hand. "Come on, Daddy. Autumn showed us how to make leaf angels like snow angels, but better because they smell good." Darien looked down at his son's eager face, then at his expensive suit, then at the woman who had somehow brought magic back into his sterile, controlled world in less than a week. Something in her patient green eyes seemed to say that whatever he decided would be okay, but that this moment, this choice, mattered more than he might realize. Slowly, carefully, he set Lizzie down and shrugged off his suit jacket. The next 20 minutes were a revelation. He lay in a pile of autumn leaves with his children, staring up at the Seattle sky, listening to Autumn tell them about the different types of clouds, while Dante used his tie as a leaf-gathering rope, and Lizzie braided stems together into a crown. His white dress shirt would never recover. His hair was full of twigs, and he couldn't remember the last time he had felt this present. Autumn used to work with kids whose mommies and daddies were sad, Lizzie said matter-of-factly, as she placed her leaf crown on his head. She says, "It's okay to be sad sometimes, but it's not okay to forget how to be happy." Darien's eyes found Autumn's across the leaf-scattered lawn. She was watching the interaction with a soft expression that held no judgment, no pity, just a quiet understanding that made his chest tight with emotions he had been suppressing for 3 years. "Is that what she told you?" he asked his daughter, his voice rougher than he intended. "She told us that sometimes grown-ups need practice remembering how to play, just like kids need practice remembering how to share." Dante chimed in, flopping down beside his father in the leaves. "And she said that our mommy would want us to be happy even though she can't be here to see it." The words hit Darien like a freight train. In 3 years, he had never talked to his children about Emma's death in any meaningful way, had never acknowledged their loss or helped them process it. He had been so consumed with his own grief that he had failed to see theirs, had failed to guide them through it. "Autumn," he said, sitting up in the leaves, his voice catching slightly. Could we talk later, after the children are in bed?" She nodded, something flickering in her eyes. That might have been relief. "Of course," as if sensing the weight of the moment. Dante suddenly stood up and shook himself off like a puppy, sending leaves flying everywhere. "I'm hungry. Can we have the spaghetti that looks like worms again? Only if you promise to eat it like a civilized human being, and not actually pretend to be an excavator this time." Autumn laughed, and the serious moment dissolved into the easy rhythm of family life. But as they all headed toward the house, Darien carrying Lizzie, Dante skipping ahead, Autumn walking beside them with grass stains on her jeans and genuine contentment on her face, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not just in his children, but in himself. For the first time in 3 years, his house felt like it might become a home again. And the woman walking beside him, this stranger who had appeared in their lives less than a week ago, was somehow at the center of that transformation. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with the first real hope he had felt since Emma died. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 9 times as Darien made his way down to the kitchen, his footsteps unusually hesitant on the polished hardwood. He had changed from his leaf-stained clothes into dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, the most casual he had dressed in years. Somehow his usual armor of expensive suits felt wrong for the conversation he was about to have. He found Autumn in the kitchen, standing at the massive island with 2 steaming mugs in front of her. She had changed into soft leggings and an oversized cream cardigan that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and she was staring out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. "I made tea," she said, without turning around. Somehow sensing his presence, Mrs. Morrison mentioned, "You prefer Earl Grey in the evenings." "Thank you." He accepted the mug, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The touch was electric, unexpected, and he found himself studying her face in the warm kitchen lighting. "How did you know I'd be unable to sleep?" A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You have the look of a man carrying questions he's afraid to ask." They settled on opposite sides of the kitchen island, the granite surface creating a safe distance between them, though the intimacy of the quiet house made even that feel insufficient. Outside, Seattle hummed with its usual nighttime energy, but inside the Blackthornne mansion, the world had shrunk to just the 2 of them, and the weight of everything unspoken. "Today," Darien began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "I haven't seen my children like that since," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Since their mother died." Autumn said gently, saving him from having to voice it himself. How do you know about Emma? His gray eyes sharpened slightly, not with anger, but with the weariness of a man who had learned to guard his privacy fiercely. Mrs. Morrison told me the basics. And the children, they mention her sometimes, little things. Autumn wrapped her hands around her mug, using the warmth to steady herself. Dante says, you have pictures of her in your office, but nowhere else in the house. Lizzie asked me if Mommy's watch from heaven because she wants to show hers the leaf crown she made. Darien's throat constricted. I didn't know I thought if I didn't talk about it, it would be easier for them. Easier for them, or easier for you? The question was delivered without judgment, but it hit him like a physical blow. He set down his mug and stood abruptly, moving to the window, needing distance from those perceptive green eyes that seemed to see straight through him. I loved her, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma, where she made everything make sense. The empire I'd built, the success, all of it felt meaningless until I had someone to share it with. And then she got pregnant and everything was perfect. We had names picked out, nurseries designed, our whole future planned. Autumn remained silent, understanding that this was a dam finally bursting after 3 years of careful containment. She went into labor 6 weeks early. Complications. The doctor said I had to choose. Try to save her or save the babies. I couldn't. His hands pressed against the cool glass of the window. I couldn't choose. I froze. And while I was standing there paralyzed, she made the choice for me. She told them to save the children to Darien. Autumn's voice was soft and he realized she had moved closer, though she didn't touch him. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He turned to face her, and she saw the raw pain he'd been hiding behind expensive suits and controlled expressions for 3 years. I'm supposed to be decisive. I make million-dollar decisions every day without hesitation. But when it mattered most, when my family needed me to be strong, I failed. You didn't fail. You were terrified and heartbroken and facing an impossible situation. And then they handed me these 2 perfect babies, and all I could see was what it had cost. Every time I looked at them, I saw Emma's sacrifice. I saw my failure. His voice cracked. What kind of father resents his children for existing? The kind who's human. Autumn said firmly, stepping closer. The kind who's grieving and scared and doing his best with unbearable circumstances. Darien, your children don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. He studied her face in the dim light. This woman who had walked into his broken family and somehow started putting the pieces back together without him even realizing it was happening. How do you know so much about grief? Something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of pain that matched his own. Because I've been there. Different circumstances. Same devastating loss of someone I thought I'd spend my life with. What happened? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. My fiancé was in a terrible car accident with a drunk driver 10 months ago. We were supposed to be married in December. The doctor said he was dead, and I was so angry afterward at everything and everyone. I quit my job. Couldn't handle seeing families torn apart when mine had just been destroyed. That's why I'm here. Instead of working with child services, I'm still figuring out how to live with the empty space where our future used to be. The revelation hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't just a nanny hired to manage his children. This was a woman who understood loss, who was fighting her own battles with grief while somehow having the strength to help his family heal. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it completely. So am I for you, for Emma. For those babies who lost their mother before they could know how extraordinary she must have been. Autumn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. But Darien, your children are not your punishment for surviving. They're your reason to keep living. Something broke open in his chest. 3 years of carefully contained emotion, threatening to spill over. I don't know how to be what they need. You don't have to know how. You just have to try. You just have to show up. As if summoned by their conversation, a small sound drifted down from upstairs, Lizzie crying softly. Both adults froze, listening. Nightmare, Autumn said quietly, already moving toward the stairs. She gets them sometimes, usually about being lost and not being able to find anyone. Wait. Darien caught her arm gently. Let me try. Something warm and proud flickered in her eyes. She likes it when you rub small circles on her back and hum. Doesn't matter what song. As he headed upstairs to comfort his daughter, Darien felt something shift inside him. Not the complete healing of 3 years' worth of pain, but the first tentative step toward becoming the father his children deserved, and the man Emma would have wanted him to be. Behind him, Autumn remained in the kitchen, watching him go with a mixture of hope and something else, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of feelings she hadn't expected to feel again. 2 weeks had passed since that night in the kitchen, and the Blackthorne mansion had transformed into something Darien barely recognized, something that felt startlingly like a home. The changes were everywhere, children's laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for years, finger paintings proudly displayed on the stainless steel refrigerator, the lingering scent of homemade cookies replacing the sterile smell of expensive cleaning products. Darien found himself coming home earlier each day, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. He told himself it was about the children, about making up for lost time, but he was honest enough to admit that wasn't the complete truth. There was something about Autumn's presence that had become as essential to him as breathing. The way she hummed while making breakfast, how she tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the soft smile that appeared whenever she watched him with Dante and Lizzie. This morning, he stood in his home office doorway, watching through the window as Autumn pushed both children on the tire swing he'd had installed just days ago. Her laughter carried on the autumn breeze, and something in his chest loosened at the sound. For the first time in 3 years, he was starting to understand what happiness felt like again. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, jolting him from his reverie. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Margaret Sinclair, Director of Child Welfare Services, Mr. Blackthorne. Her crisp voice cut through the peaceful morning like a blade. I hope you have a moment to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your household. What kind of concerns? Darien's voice was carefully controlled, but his grip on the phone had tightened until his knuckles were white. We've received a report suggesting that your current child-care arrangements may not be appropriate. Anonymous tip, but with enough specific details to warrant investigation. I'm afraid we'll need to schedule a home visit. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A report about what specifically? Allegations that an unlicensed individual is providing primary care for your children, that there may be neglect regarding proper supervision and educational structure. The caller mentioned children playing unsupervised in potentially dangerous conditions, irregular meal times, lack of proper developmental activities. Each word felt like a physical blow. Darien's mind raced, trying to understand who would make such a call and why. Miss Sinclair, I can assure you that my children are receiving excellent care. I'm sure that's your perspective, Mr. Blackthorne. However, given your history with childcare providers and the fact that your current caregiver has no formal credentials in early childhood development, we need to conduct our own assessment. What do you mean, my history? 5 nannies in 2 months, Mr. Blackthorne. Multiple reports of the children being difficult to manage disruptive behavior. From the outside, it appears that there may be ongoing stability issues in your home. Darien felt sick. Everything that had finally started to come together was suddenly crumbling around him. When do you want to schedule this visit? Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., and Mr. Blackthorne, I'd recommend ensuring that your current arrangements are thoroughly documented and professional. The line went dead, leaving Darien staring out at the scene that had brought him such peace just moments before. Autumn was now sitting in the grass with the children, helping them identify different types of leaves, her face animated with the same patient enthusiasm she brought to everything involving Dante and Lizzie. How was he supposed to tell her that someone had reported her, that everything they'd built together was now under threat? Daddy, Dante's voice called from outside. Come help us, Autumn says. You know about science stuff. The innocent request felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Through the window, he could see Lizzie holding up a particularly colorful leaf, her face bright with curiosity and joy. These were the same children who had been withdrawn and defiant just weeks ago. Autumn hadn't just changed their behavior. She had given them back their childhood, and now someone wanted to take that away. He made his way outside, forcing his expression into something approaching normally. But Autumn's perceptive green eyes immediately picked up on his tension. Everything okay? She asked quietly while Dante enthusiastically showed off his leaf collection. We need to talk, he said, the words heavier than he intended. Later, after they're asleep, concern flickered across her features, but she simply nodded, turning her attention back to the children with the same gentle focus she always gave them. Watching her, Darien felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. This woman had brought light back into his family's life. She had helped him remember how to be a father, how to be human. The thought of losing her, of watching his children's faces close off again, was unbearable. But as the afternoon wore on, a darker thought began to take shape. The report had been anonymous, but it contained specific details about their daily routine, about Autumn's background, about things that only someone with inside knowledge would know. Someone who knew their family personally had made that call. "Autumn," Lizzie said during their afternoon snack, "are you going to stay with us forever?" The question hung in the air like a prophecy, and Autumn's hesitation was barely perceptible before she smiled. "I'm here now, sweetheart. That's what matters." But Darien caught the shadow that passed over her face, the careful way she avoided making promises she might not be able to keep. She was already protecting herself, already preparing for the possibility that this beautiful, fragile thing they'd built together might not survive whatever was coming. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, Darien found Autumn in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book she wasn't really reading. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across her face, and for a moment, he was struck by how perfectly she fit into this space that had felt empty for so long. "There's going to be a home visit tomorrow," he said without preamble, unable to find a gentle way to deliver the news. "Child Welfare Services. Someone reported us." The book slipped from her hands and all the color drained from her face. "Reported us for what?" "Neglect, improper supervision, the fact that you're not a licensed childcare provider." He sat down across from her, studying her expression carefully. "Autumn, is there anything in your background that could complicate this? Anything that might give them cause for concern?" Something flickered in her eyes. "Not guilt, but fear. There was an incident 8 months ago before I left Child Services, a case that went wrong, a child I couldn't save. There was an investigation. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. But what? But my supervisor suggested I take extended leave, said I was too emotionally invested, that I needed time to process my grief over David, my fiancé. The investigation file. It's probably still in my personnel record." Darien felt the walls closing in around them. An emotionally unstable former social worker with a documented history of professional concerns, caring for the children of a widowed billionaire who couldn't keep regular childcare. On paper, it looked damaging enough to give Child Services everything they needed to intervene. "We'll figure this out," he said. But even as he spoke the words, he could see the doubt in her eyes, because they both knew that sometimes love wasn't enough to protect the people who mattered most. And sometimes the very thing that saved you could be taken away by forces completely beyond your control. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 a.m., cutting through the carefully orchestrated calm of the Blackthornne household like a blade. Darien had been awake since 5, reviewing every detail of their daily routine, every interaction between Autumn and the children, trying to anticipate what Margaret Sinclair might find objectionable. He had even convinced himself to wear one of his most conservative navy suits, as if the right armor might protect what mattered most. Autumn stood beside him in the foyer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had chosen a simple black dress and pulled her auburn hair into a neat bun, transforming herself from the warm, approachable woman who built leaf furs into someone who looked capable of handling a boardroom. But Darien could see the tremor in her fingers, the way she kept glancing toward the staircase where Dante and Lizzie were playing in their rooms, blissfully unaware that their world might be about to change forever. Margaret Sinclair proved to be exactly what Darien had feared, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of expression that suggested she had seen too much disappointment to be easily impressed. She was accompanied by a younger man with a clipboard, and the officious manner of someone who took his authority very seriously. "Mr. Blackthornne," she said crisply, stepping into the foyer and immediately beginning her assessment. Her eyes took in every detail, the marble floors, the expensive art, the pristine perfection that money could buy. "And this must be Miss Reyes." "Yes," Autumn said, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from her small frame. "I'm Autumn Reyes. I've been caring for Dante and Lizzie for the past 3 weeks, without proper licensing or credentials, in early childhood development," Sinclair noted, making something on her tablet. "That's quite irregular, don't you think?" "I have 6 years of experience as a social worker with Child Protective Services," Autumn replied calmly. "While not specifically early childhood education, I do have extensive training in child development and trauma response," had the younger man corrected, glancing at his notes. "You're currently on extended leave, following an investigation into professional conduct, correct?" Darien saw Autumn flinch slightly, but she kept her composure. "I took leave to process personal grief. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing." Before Sinclair could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed from upstairs, followed by Dante's voice. Autumn. Lizzie won't share the blue crayon, and she's being mean. I am not being mean. Liz's indignant response carried clearly through the house. You used it all morning. Sinclair raised an eyebrow. Shall we observe how you handle conflict resolution, Miss Reyes? They made their way upstairs to the children's playroom, where a minor war had broken out over art supplies. Dante stood with his arms crossed, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles, while Lizzie clutched the disputed crayon against her chest, tears threatening in her storm-gray eyes. Autumn knelt down between them, ignoring the adults watching her every move. Okay, tell me what's happening here. She won't share, Dante declared. He's been hogging it forever, Lizzie protested. I see, Dante. How long have you been using the blue crayon? He glanced at his picture, clearly trying to calculate. Maybe a really long time. And Lizzie, what do you want to draw with it? The sky in my picture. But it's not a sky without blue. Autumn nodded. Seriously, you're both right. Dante, you have been using it for a while. And Lizzie, skies do need blue. What do you think would be fair? Darien watched, transfixed as his children worked through the problem with Autumn's gentle guidance. No raised voices, no arbitrary rules imposed by adult authority, just patience and respect for their feelings, even over something as simple as a crayon. I guess I could let her use it for 10 minutes, Dante offered reluctantly. That's very generous. Autumn smiled. Lizzie, does that work for you? Yes, and then Dante can have it back for 10 minutes. Perfect. You both found a solution that makes everyone happy. Sinclair made more notes, but Darien couldn't read her expression. The younger man was documenting the room itself, the educational materials, the safety measures, the general organization. Mr. Blackthorne, Sinclair said quietly, might we speak privately while Miss Reyes continues with the children? They moved to his home office, where Sinclair settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk, with the air of someone preparing for an interrogation. The anonymous report was quite detailed, she began. It mentioned erratic behavior from the children, lack of structure, potential safety hazards. What I'm observing doesn't match those allegations because they were false, Darien said firmly. My children have never been happier or more stable. Yes, I can see that, which makes me wonder. She consulted her tablet. The caller knew quite a bit about your family's history, the previous nannies, the specific challenges with the children, even details about Miss Reyes's background that wouldn't be public knowledge. A cold realization began to form in Darien's mind. You think it was someone with inside access. I think someone wanted to cause trouble for your family specifically. The question is, who? Before he could answer, the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway drew their attention to the window. Darien looked out and felt his blood turn to ice. Victoria Sterling Chen stood beside a sleek black Mercedes, adjusting her designer sunglasses with the predatory grace of someone who had come for a fight. His former sister-in-law, Emma's older sister, had arrived unannounced, and the timing was far from coincidental. Expecting someone? Sinclair asked, noting his expression. Unfortunately, Darien muttered, already moving toward the stairs. Victoria let herself in through the front door as if she still lived there, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble with sharp precision. At 38, she was stunning in the cold, calculated way that money and professional maintenance could achieve. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and her black Chanel suit looked like armor designed for corporate warfare. Darien, she said, her voice carrying the faint trace of condescension that had always set his teeth on edge. I see you have visitors. Victoria, what are you doing here? Her smile was sharp as glass. I heard there were some concerns about the children's welfare. As their only remaining blood relative besides you, I felt I should be present. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Victoria had made the anonymous report. She had used her knowledge of his family to try to destroy the happiness they had finally found. You, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You called them? I called them because I'm concerned about my sister's children being cared for by some emotionally unstable woman with questionable professional history, she said coolly. Emma would be horrified to know that her babies are being raised by a stranger while you're too busy playing house to notice. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Every insecurity, every moment of doubt he'd had about his worthiness as a father came rushing back. But before he could respond, a small voice cut through the tension like a knife. Aunt Victoria. Lizzie stood at the top of the stairs, her face lighting up with genuine joy. You came to visit. She started down the stairs, and Darien's heart clenched as he realized that his daughter had no idea that the woman she was running toward had just tried to destroy their family. Lizzie threw herself into Victoria's arms with the uncomplicated joy of a child who remembered only the good times, birthday presents and Christmas visits, not the underlying tension that had always existed between Victoria and Darien. Victoria caught her niece smoothly, her expression softening for just a moment before the mask of cold determination slipped back into place. "Hello, darling," Victoria murmured, kissing the top of Liz's dark hair. "You've grown so much since I last saw you." "That was at Christmas," Lizzie said matter-of-factly. "Daddy said you were too busy to visit anymore." Something sharp flickered in Victoria's blue eyes as she looked over Liz's head at Darien. "Daddy says a lot of things, doesn't he?" Margaret Sinclair watched the family dynamics unfold with the keen interest of someone trained to read between lines. Autumn had appeared at the top of the stairs with Dante, who hung back uncertainly, clearly sensing the tension, even if he didn't understand its source. Mrs. Sterling Chen Sinclair said, consulting her tablet, "You're the one who contacted our office." Victoria set Lizzie down gently, but kept one manicured hand on her shoulder. "I am, as Emma's sister and the children's aunt, I have a responsibility to ensure their well-being." "Aunt Victoria," Dante said cautiously, finally making his way down the stairs, "why are there strangers in our house? These nice people are just making sure you and Lizzie are happy and safe," Victoria said, her voice taking on the artificially sweet tone adults used when they were about to deliver devastating news to children. "Sometimes when daddies are very busy with work, they don't notice if things aren't quite right at home." "Things are right," Lizzie said, confused. "Autumn makes pancakes that look like animals, and Daddy plays in the leaves with us now." "Does he?" Victoria's smile was sharp. "And who is Autumn, sweetheart?" Before either child could answer, Autumn stepped forward, her composure steady, despite the obvious hostility radiating from Victoria. "I'm Autumn Reyes. I've been helping care for Dante and Lizzie." Victoria's gaze swept over her dismissively, taking in her simple dress, her lack of expensive accessories, the way she instinctively moved closer to the children when threatened. "I see. And what qualifies you to care for my sister's children?" 6 years of experience in child welfare services, Autumn replied evenly. "And 3 weeks of getting to know 2 remarkable children who deserve love and stability." "Love and stability," Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "Is that what you call it? Because from what I understand, you're an emotionally compromised former social worker who left her job under questionable circumstances." Darien stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "That's enough, Victoria, is it? Because I think these children deserve better than to be experimental subjects for someone working through her own trauma." Victoria's voice rose slightly, and both children pressed closer to Autumn instinctively. "Emma would be horrified to know that her babies are being used to heal some stranger's broken heart." The words hit Autumn like physical blows, and Darien saw her face go pale. Every insecurity she'd confided to him, every doubt about whether she was helping or potentially harming the children, was being weaponized against her. "Autumn isn't broken," Lizzie said suddenly, her small voice cutting through the adult tension. "She's sad sometimes, like Daddy is sad sometimes, but she still takes care of us." "Yeah," Dante added fiercely. "She doesn't yell at us or leave when we're upset. She stays." Margaret Sinclair made more notes, and Darien realized that Victoria's attack was backfiring. The social worker was witnessing the children's genuine affection for Autumn, their instinctive defense of her, their obvious security in her presence. But Victoria wasn't finished. She knelt down to Liz's level, her voice becoming gentle and persuasive. "Sweetheart, wouldn't you like to come stay with me for a while? I have that big house in Bellevue with the swimming pool, remember? And I could hire you a proper nanny, someone with the right training." "I don't want a proper nanny," Lizzie said, confusion clear in her storm gray eyes. "I want Autumn, and I want to stay home with Daddy," Dante added, moving to stand protectively in front of his sister. Victoria's mask of patience began to slip. Children don't always know what's best for them. That's why adults have to make difficult decisions. "You're right," Darien said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. "Children don't always know what's best for them, but I do know what's best for mine." He moved to stand beside Autumn, his hand finding hers in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Victoria, you made the anonymous report because you're threatened by the fact that my children are finally happy. For 3 years, you've watched me struggle, watched them struggle, and you never once offered to help. But the moment someone comes into our lives who actually makes a difference, you try to destroy it. I'm trying to protect them. No, you're trying to control them the same way you tried to control Emma. The words came out harsher than he intended. But years of suppressed resentment were finally breaking free. You never forgave me for taking her away from your perfect little world of social climbing and appearances. And now you can't stand that I might actually move on, that she might not be the shrine you think she should be. Victoria's composure cracked completely. How dare you? Emma was my wife, Darien said firmly. And if she were here, she would want her children to be loved and happy. She would want them to have a mother figure who puts their needs first, not someone who sees them as accessories to her own image. I am their family. Family doesn't use children as weapons, Autumn said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening in her green eyes. Family protects children even when it's difficult, even when it means putting aside your own wants for their needs. Margaret Sinclair closed her tablet with a decisive snap. I think I've seen enough. The room fell silent, everyone waiting for her verdict. Darien felt Autumn's hand trembling in his, felt his children pressed against their sides, and realized that whatever happened next would determine not just their future, but whether the fragile family they'd built could survive the forces trying to tear it apart. Mr. Blackthorne Sinclair said finally, "Your children are clearly well cared for, emotionally stable, and thriving in their current environment. While Miss Reyes may not have traditional childcare credentials, her experience in social services and the obvious bond she's formed with your children speak volumes." Victoria's face went white with rage. "You can't be serious. This woman, Sinclair interrupted, has accomplished what 5 previous caregivers could not. She's created a stable, loving environment for 2 children who have experienced significant trauma. The allegations in the anonymous report appear to be unfounded and motivated by personal grievances rather than genuine concern for child welfare." She turned to Victoria with the kind of look that suggested she'd dealt with vengeful family members before. "Mrs. Sterling Chen, I would strongly advise you to reconsider your approach to your relationship with your niece and nephew. Children need love, not litigation." As Sinclair and her assistant gathered their things to leave, Darien felt something shift permanently in his understanding of what family meant. It wasn't about blood or obligation or maintaining the status quo. It was about the people who showed up, who stayed through the difficult moments, who chose love over control. Victoria stood in his foyer, isolated and furious, having lost the battle she'd started. But as he looked at his children, safe in the circle of Autumn's arms, Darien realized that Victoria's attack had accomplished something she never intended. It had forced him to finally completely choose his new family over the ghosts of his past. The house felt different in the aftermath of Victoria's departure, lighter somehow, as if a weight that had been pressing down on them for years had finally been lifted. The children had recovered from the morning's drama with the resilience that only 3-year-olds possessed, and were now napping peacefully in their rooms, exhausted by the emotional intensity they didn't fully understand. Darien stood in the kitchen, still wearing his navy suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, staring out at the garden where this whole transformation had begun months ago. The late afternoon sun cast everything in gold, and he could almost see the ghosts of their recent happiness. Autumn reading under the oak tree, the children building their elaborate leaf fort, the sound of laughter that had become as essential to him as breathing. "They're asleep," Autumn said softly from the doorway, and he turned to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She had changed from her formal black dress into jeans and a soft gray sweater, but there was something different about her now, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Victoria's poisonous words, "Good. They needed the rest after everything." She moved into the kitchen but kept her distance, fidgeting with the sleeves of her sweater in a way that told him she was working up to something difficult. "Darien, we need to talk." The words sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the October weather. If this is about what Victoria said, it's not about what she said. It's about what she was right about. Autumn's green eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "I have been using your family to heal my own broken heart. When I took this job, I wasn't thinking about what was best for Dante and Lizzie. I was thinking about how desperately I needed to feel useful again, needed to feel like I could save someone since I couldn't save David." "Autumn, that's not it is." She held up a hand to stop him. "For weeks I've been telling myself that I was helping them, but the truth is they were helping me. They were giving me a reason to get up in the morning, a way to feel needed and important and not completely destroyed by grief." Darien moved closer, his heart clenching at the pain in her voice. Even if that's true, it doesn't change what you've given them. What you've given all of us, doesn't it? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not trained for this, Darien. I'm not a child development specialist or an early childhood educator. I'm a grief-stricken woman who got lucky because two lonely children needed exactly the kind of broken attention I had to offer. You're not broken. Yes, I am. The tears finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in silent streams. I'm completely shattered, and I've been pretending otherwise because being here, being needed by them, made the pain bearable for a little while. But what happens when they need more than I can give? What happens when my grief catches up with me again, and I can't be present for them the way they deserve? The question hung in the air between them, and Darien realized this wasn't just about her qualifications or Victoria's attack. This was about fear. The same paralyzing fear that had kept him distant from his children for 3 years. The terror of failing someone who depended on you completely. What happens? He said quietly, moving close enough to touch her face, to brush away her tears with his thumb, is the same thing that happens in every real family. We figure it out together. We hold each other up when we're weak, and we forgive each other when we're not perfect. Darien, do you love them? He asked, his gray eyes searching hers, not as a professional obligation or a way to heal yourself, but as children who have become part of your heart. Of course, I do. The answer came without hesitation. I love them more than I ever thought possible. They're funny and smart and resilient, and they see the world in ways that make me remember how to hope again. Then that's all that matters. Everything else, credentials, training, past mistakes, none of that matters compared to love. It's not that simple, isn't it? He cradled her face in both hands now, forcing her to meet his gaze. Autumn, you've spent 3 weeks proving that love is exactly that simple. You've shown my children what it feels like to be truly seen and accepted. You've taught me how to be a father instead of just a provider. You've brought life back to a house that was dying inside its own perfection. What if I hurt them? What if I leave when things get difficult the way David left me? The comparison hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly he understood. This wasn't about her qualifications or Victoria's accusations. This was about Autumn's deepest fear, that love always ended in abandonment, that caring deeply only led to devastating loss. David didn't choose to leave you, he said gently, and I'm not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. You can't promise that. I can promise that I will fight for this family with everything I have. I can promise that whatever challenges come, we'll face them together. His voice grew rougher, more urgent. Autumn, 3 years ago, I lost the woman I thought was the love of my life, and I was sure I would never feel anything like that again. I was wrong. She went very still, her breath catching in her throat. Darien, I'm in love with you. The words came out in a rush, 3 years of emotional walls crashing down at once. I'm in love with your patience and your kindness, and the way you make finger paintings with my children like they're creating masterpieces. I'm in love with the way you listen when they're upset and the way you've never once made them feel like their emotions were too much or too complicated. This is crazy, she whispered, but she wasn't pulling away. If anything, she was leaning closer, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. Maybe, but if it's crazy, then I don't want to be sane anymore. He rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her presence. I spent 3 years thinking that moving on meant betraying Emma's memory. But you've shown me that love doesn't diminish. When you share it, it grows. For a long moment, they stood there in the golden afternoon light, holding each other as if they could stop time, as if they could protect this fragile, beautiful thing they'd built from all the forces that seemed determined to tear it apart. I love you, too, Autumn finally whispered, and the words hit him harder than any business victory ever had. I love you, and I love those children, and I'm terrified of losing any of it. Then stay, he said simply, not as their nanny, not as someone I hired to fix my problems, but as part of our family. Stay and help me figure out how to be better at this whole parenting thing. Stay and let me show you that not all love ends in goodbye. Before she could answer, the sound of small feet padding down the hallway announced that nap time was over. Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair sticking up at impossible angles, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Autumn, are you sad? He asked with the direct concern that only children possessed. She knelt down to his level, her heart full to overflowing with love for this small boy who worried about her feelings, even fresh from sleep. No, sweetheart, I'm not sad anymore. Good, he said matter-of-factly, then climbed into her arms for a post-nap cuddle. Can we make cookies? The kind with the chocolate chips that look like tiny smiles. Over his head, Autumn's eyes met Darien's, and in that moment, surrounded by the ordinary magic of family life, she knew that this was where she belonged. Not because she was running from grief, but because she had found something worth running toward. 6 months later, the Blackthorne mansion had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the sterile monument to grief. It had been a year ago. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, family photos lined the hallways, and the sound of laughter was so common that Mrs. Morrison had started humming while she worked. But on this particular morning in late April, as Seattle's famous spring rain droomed against the windows, Darien found himself facing a crisis that made Victoria's attack seem simple by comparison. The letter had arrived by courier at 7 a.m., marked urgent and confidential. David Chen, Autumn's deceased fiancé, was not dead. He had been in a coma for 8 months following the car accident and had only recently awakened with partial memory loss. His family, who had believed him dead and held a funeral, had tracked down Autumn through her old job at Child Services. They wanted her to come to San Francisco immediately. Darien sat in his home office, the letter trembling in his hands as he listened to the sounds of his family starting their day. Autumn was making breakfast, her voice drifting up from the kitchen as she helped Dante practice counting in Spanish. Liz's laughter echoed from the dining room, where she was undoubtedly arranging her toy animals in elaborate formations while she waited for her pancakes. This was his life now, this beautiful, chaotic, perfect life that had grown around Autumn's presence like flowers growing toward sunlight, and in a few hours he was going to have to tell the woman he loved that everything they had built together might be built on a lie. Daddy Liz's voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. She stood in the doorway wearing her favorite purple dress and holding her stuffed rabbit, her storm gray eyes curious. Why do you look scared? I'm not scared, sweetheart, just thinking about grown-up things. She patted across the room and climbed into his lap with the unconscious trust that still took his breath away. Autumn says when we're worried about something, it helps to talk about it with people who love us. The simple wisdom nearly broke him. Man 5. She says that's what families do. They help carry the heavy feelings so nobody has to hold them all by themselves. Family, the word that had once filled him with terror, now felt like the most natural thing in the world. These children were his family. Autumn was his family. And in an hour, he was going to have to ask her to choose between the future they were building and the past that had just returned from the dead. Lizzie, he said carefully, what would you do if someone you loved very much had to go away? Not forever, but for a while. She considered this with the seriousness that only a young child could bring to hypothetical questions. Would they come back? I don't know. Would they want to come back? I hope so. Then I would tell them that I love them, and I would wait for them, because that's what love means. It means not giving up on people, even when it's hard. Out of the mouths of babes. Darien held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and realized that she was right. Love meant fighting for what mattered, even when the odds seemed impossible. Daddy, Lizzie, Autumn's voice called from downstairs. Breakfast is ready. As they made their way to the kitchen, Darien forced himself to appear normal, to participate in the morning routine that had become sacred to all of them. Autumn smiled at him over the coffee she'd prepared exactly the way he liked it, and he memorized the sight of her in the spring sunlight, wearing his old Columbia sweatshirt over leggings, her auburn hair falling in soft waves around her face. I was thinking, she said, serving heart-shaped pancakes to the children, maybe we could drive out to the tulip fields this weekend. I know it's still early in the season, but Dante wants to see if flowers really grow in rows like corn. Flowers don't grow like corn, Dante protested, but he was grinning. That's silly. Well, there's only one way to find out. Autumn laughed, ruffling his hair. Darien watched this exchange, so normal, so perfectly domestic, and felt his heart breaking and healing at the same time. This was what he was about to risk losing. This was what Autumn was about to have to choose. After breakfast, while the children played in the living room, he found Autumn loading the dishwasher and summoned every ounce of courage he possessed. Autumn, we need to talk. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. What's wrong? He handed her the letter without preamble, watching as her face went white, then gray, then a shade he'd never seen before. Her hands shook as she read, and he caught the coffee mug that slipped from her fingers before it could shatter on the marble floor. This isn't possible, she whispered. I saw the car. I identified his body. I buried him. Apparently, His family made a mistake in the identification. The patient in the coma had no ID, and they were so devastated they didn't look closely enough. Darien's voice was gentle but steady. The real David has been in a specialty care facility in San Francisco. He's awake now, but he has gaps in his memory. He knows he was supposed to marry someone named Autumn, but he can't remember much else. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the letter still clutched in her trembling hands. 8 months. He's been alive for 8 months while you've been building a life here, while you've been healing and growing and becoming part of our family. Darien knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand in both of his. Autumn, I need you to know that whatever you decide to do, I will support you completely. If you need to go to him, if you need to explore what's left of that relationship, I understand. Do you? Her green eyes were bright with tears and confusion and something that might have been panic because I don't understand anything right now. I understand that you loved him, that you were going to marry him, that you've been grieving a loss that turns out to be something completely different. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture that had become automatic comfort between them. I also understand that love isn't finite. The fact that you loved him doesn't diminish what we have here. What if it does? What if seeing him again changes everything? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Autumn, I need you to hear me clearly. I love you, not as a replacement for someone else, not as a convenience or a solution to my problems, but as the woman who brought my children back to life and taught me how to live again. That love isn't going anywhere regardless of what happens with David. She was crying openly now, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. Through the archway, he could see Dante and Lizzie playing with their blocks, their voices a soft counterpoint to Autumn's tears. What am I supposed to do? She whispered against his shirt. You're supposed to go to San Francisco, he said, the words tearing his heart out even as he spoke them. You're supposed to see him, talk to him, figure out what's real, and what's just the ghost of a life you thought you'd lost forever. And if I go, what happens to us? What happens to them? We'll be here when you get back. However long it takes, whatever you need to work through, we'll be here. She pulled back to look at him, her face stir with tears, but her eyes searching his with desperate intensity. How can you be so sure? Because in the past 6 months, you've shown me what real love looks like. It's not possessive or demanding or afraid of competition. It's patient and generous and brave enough to let people make their own choices. He kept her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. I love you enough to let you go figure out what your heart needs because I trust that what we have is strong enough to survive the truth. Darien Autumn. Liz's voice interrupted them, and they turned to see both children standing in the kitchen doorway, their faces serious with the kind of intuitive understanding that children possessed. Are you crying because you're sad or because you're happy? Lizzie asked, moving closer with her characteristic directness. Both, sweetheart, Autumn managed, wiping her eyes. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they have big feelings that are too complicated for just one emotion. Dante climbed into her lap without invitation, his small arms going around her neck. Are you going away? The question hung in the air, like a challenge to everything they'd built together. Autumn looked at Darien over Dante's head, her eyes asking for permission to tell the truth. He nodded. I might have to go away for a little while, she said carefully. Someone I used to know needs my help figuring out some important things. Will you come back? Lizzie asked, the question carrying the weight of every abandonment she'd ever experienced. Autumn's eyes met Darien's across the kitchen, and in that moment, he saw her make a choice that would change everything. Yes, she said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. I will come back, because this is my family, and families don't give up on each other. As she held his children and promised them a future he wasn't sure she could deliver, Darien felt something settle in his chest that felt like peace. Whatever happened in San Francisco, whatever truths emerged from the past, they would face it together. Because love, he had learned, wasn't about avoiding difficult choices. It was about making them with courage and faith in the absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. 1 year later, the October afternoon was crisp and bright, the kind of perfect Seattle day that made residents forget about the months of rain to come. In the backyard of the Blackthornne mansion, preparations were underway for what 4-year-old Dante had declared the most important party ever. And for once, his tendency toward dramatic pronouncements was entirely accurate. Darien stood at the kitchen window, adjusting his charcoal gray tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, watching as Mrs. Morrison directed the placement of white chairs on the lawn, where just over a year ago, Autumn had first taught his children how to make leaf angels. Today, those same chairs would witness something infinitely more precious. The official beginning of the family they had all chosen to create. "Daddy, you look nervous," Lizzie observed from behind him, and he turned to find his daughter, resplendent in a pale pink dress, her dark hair crowned with a wreath of baby's breath and white roses. At 4, she had grown into a confident, articulate little girl who still preferred quiet observation to her brother's more boisterous approach to life, but who no longer hid behind her stuffed rabbit when emotions ran high. He knelt to her level, straightening the small bouquet of white roses she would carry as flower girl. "Maybe a little. This is a pretty important day. Autumn says it's okay to be nervous about important things as long as you remember that the people who love you are right there with you." Autumn Jeth, thinking her name made his chest tight with anticipation and gratitude, and a love so profound it still caught him off guard sometimes. She had been gone for 6 weeks last spring, 6 of the longest weeks of his life, while she traveled to San Francisco to confront the impossible situation with David. The reunion had been devastating and healing in equal measure. David had awakened from his coma with significant memory loss, remembering only fragments of their relationship and none of the deep emotional connection that had led to their engagement. The man Autumn had grieved for 10 months was in many ways truly gone, replaced by someone who shared his face, but not his heart. More importantly, those 6 weeks apart had taught Autumn something crucial about the nature of love itself. What she had felt for David was real and valid and deserving of grief, but it belonged to a different version of herself, a woman who no longer existed. The Autumn who had fallen in love with Darien and his children was someone new, forged by loss and healing, and the daily choice to build something beautiful from the pieces of her broken heart. She had returned to Seattle with closure, with peace, and with an absolute certainty about where she belonged. "Is she ready?" Dante asked, bouncing into the kitchen wearing his miniature black suit and the ring-bearer's pillow tied carefully to his wrist. His dark hair had been tamed into something approaching respectability, though Darien suspected it wouldn't last long once the celebration began. "I think so," Darien said, though, truthfully, he had been banned from the bridal suite, formerly the guest bedroom, for the past 2 hours, while Autumn and her small army of helpers prepared for the ceremony. "Can we go check?" Dante's eyes sparkled with mischief just to make sure she didn't change her mind. "She's not going to change her mind," Lizzie said with the supreme confidence that only a 4-year-old could muster. "She told me yesterday that marrying us was the easiest decision she ever made." "Marrying us?" Darien smiled at his daughter's phrasing, which captured something essential about what was happening today. This wasn't just a wedding between 2 adults. It was the formal recognition of a family that had been growing organically for over a year, rooted in love and choice and daily commitment to each other's happiness. A soft knock on the kitchen door interrupted his thoughts, and he opened it to find Emma's parents standing on the threshold. Robert and Helen Whitmore looked older than he remembered, but their smiles were genuine as they took in the scene of controlled chaos around them. "Darien," Helen said warmly, embracing him with the easy affection of family. "The children look absolutely beautiful." "Grandma Helen," Lizzie threw herself into her grandmother's arms with enthusiasm. "Look at my flowers." "Grandpa Robert," Dante added, tugging on his grandfather's hand. "Want to see my ring pillow? I've been practicing not dropping it for weeks." Darien felt a moment of complex emotion as he watched his former in-laws with the children. Their relationship had been strained after Emma's death, marked by grief and blame, and the difficulty of maintaining connection without her as the bridge between them. But Autumn's presence in their lives had somehow healed that rift, giving them permission to love their grandchildren without the complicated weight of loss overshadowing every interaction. "She would be so happy," Helen said quietly, stepping beside Duran as they watched Robert examine Dante's ring pillow with appropriate gravitas. "Emma, she would be so happy to see them like this, to see you like this." "I hope so," Darien said, meaning it completely. "I know." "So, Emma wanted you to be loved, Darien. She wanted her children to have a mother who would cherish them. She wanted her family to be whole." Helen's eyes were bright with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Autumn is exactly what she would have chosen for all of you." Before he could respond, Mrs. Morrison appeared in the doorway, her expression both businesslike and tender. "Mr. Blackthorne, it's time." The ceremony itself was small and intimate. Just 40 guests gathered on the lawn where so much of their love story had unfolded. Autumn had wanted something simple, meaningful, focused on family rather than spectacle. As Darien took his place beside Pastor Williams with Dante and Lizzie flanking him like small protective guards, He felt the weight of the moment settle around him like a blessing. The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but the gentle acoustic melody of At Last, played by the string quartet Autumn had insisted on. And he looked up to see her at the top of the back steps. She was breathtaking. The dress was simple, elegance incarnate, ivory silk that skimmed her curves without ostentation, a square neckline that showcased the delicate gold necklace he had given her for Christmas, sleeves that fell to just below her elbows. Her auburn hair was arranged in loose waves that cascaded over one shoulder, held back by a simple comb adorned with the same white roses that crowned Liz's head. But it was her expression that stopped his breath completely. Pure joy radiated from her face as her green eyes found his across the garden, a smile so luminous it seemed to light up the entire afternoon. This was a woman who had chosen love over fear, who had chosen their imperfect, beautiful, complicated family over the safety of solitude. She walked toward him slowly, not down a traditional aisle, but along the winding garden path where they had taken so many evening walks while the children played. She carried no bouquet. Her hands were free to touch the roses climbing the arbor, to wave at Mrs. Morrison, to blow a kiss to Dante when he wiggled his fingers at her in excitement. When she reached him, when she placed her small hands in his and smiled up at him with enough love to power the entire city, Darien felt the last pieces of his carefully guarded heart finally, completely, come home. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, but Darien was only half listening to the familiar words. Instead, he was memorizing this moment. The way the afternoon light caught the gold in Autumn's hair, the sound of Lizzie's giggle when Dante whispered something in her ear, the feeling of absolute rightness that had settled in his chest like a benediction. Do you, Darien, take Autumn to be your wife, to love and cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, for as long as you both shall live? I do, he said, his voice steady and sure. And I promise to love her, not just as my wife, but as the mother of my children, as the heart of our home, as the woman who taught us all how to be a family. And do you, Autumn, take Darien to be your husband, to love and cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, for as long as you both shall live? I do, she whispered, tears streaming freely down her face, and I promise to love him not just as my husband, but as the father who showed me what strength looks like when it's tempered with tenderness, as the man who was brave enough to let love transform him completely. And do you, Dante and Lizzie, Pastor Williams continued with a smile, promise to love and honor Autumn as your mother, to be patient with her when she's learning, and to always remember that family is something we choose to create together every single day? We do, they chorused, Dante's response enthusiastic enough to make the front row chuckle, Lizzie's more solemn, but no less heartfelt. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you not just husband and wife, but a family, united by love and choice, and the courage to believe that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. The kiss was gentle and sweet, tasting of tears and hope, and the promise of all the ordinary, extraordinary days to come. When they broke apart, Darien saw his whole world reflected in Autumn's eyes, past and present and future, all flowing together into something that looked remarkably like happily ever after. We did it, she whispered against his lips. We actually did it. We did, he agreed, then louder for his children and his guests, and the whole universe to hear. We're a family. The celebration that followed was everything Darien had never known he wanted. Children running through the garden with abandon, laughter floating on the autumn air, the easy rhythm of people who genuinely loved each other sharing food and stories and joy. Autumn danced with Robert Whitmore, who told her she was exactly the daughter he'd always hoped for. Darien spun Lizzie around until she was dizzy with giggles, then taught Dante how to dip a lady properly. As the sun began to set, painting the Seattle sky in shades of rose and gold, the newly married couple found themselves alone for a moment on the back steps where this whole journey had begun. Any regrets? Darien asked, pulling Autumn close against his side as they watched their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Only one, she said, and his heart stopped for a moment before she continued with a smile. I regret that we waited so long to get to this moment. We had to wait, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We had to become the people who were ready for this kind of love. You're right, she agreed, then leaned up to kiss him again, soft and lingering and full of promise. I love you, Mr. Blackthorne. I love you, too, Mrs. Blackthorne. As if summoned by the use of her new name, Lizzie appeared at Autumn's side, her flower crown slightly askew, but her smile radiant. Mama, she said, testing out the word they had all agreed she could use whenever she felt ready. Autumn's breath caught and fresh tears spilled over. Yes, sweetheart, can we make this a tradition? Getting married in the garden every year. Darien laughed, a sound of pure happiness that echoed across the garden. I think once is probably enough. Princess, we could have a party every year on this day, Autumn suggested, to celebrate the day we became a family. Yes, Dante called from across the lawn, apparently having overheard despite being 20 feet away. And every year, we can make bigger cakes. Later, after the guests had gone home, and the children had finally fallen asleep in their beds, exhausted by excitement and sugar and the overwhelming happiness of the day, Darien and Autumn sat together in their bedroom, still wearing their wedding clothes, sharing a quiet bottle of champagne. So, Autumn said, curling against his side with the easy intimacy of people who had chosen each other completely. What do you think? Did we make the right choice? Darien looked out the window at the garden where they had fallen in love, where their children had learned to be children again, where they had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Ask me in 50 years, he said, then kissed her temple and held her close as Seattle settled into night around them. But even as he said it, he knew the answer. They had made the only choice that mattered. They had chosen love over fear, family over solitude, hope over the safety of protecting their hearts. And every day for the rest of their lives, they would wake up and make that choice again, building their happiness one ordinary moment at a time. Because sometimes the greatest love stories weren't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes they were about a woman who could calm frightened children and teach a broken man how to live again. About a man brave enough to let love transform him completely. About the daily miracle of people choosing each other over and over again. Sometimes the greatest love stories were simply about coming home. Would you have made the same choice if you were in Autumn's position? When faced with a life-faltering decision between past love and present happiness, what would guide your heart? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.